Good afternoon. Welcome to the TG Arena on remote work. What does it mean for people, places, and planning? My name is Pipsa Salolammi, and I'm here with my colleague Linda Randall. She is the main author of the report that we're about to launch today on remote work, and she's also the project manager. Maybe we can see the next slide. You might wonder what the TG Arena stands for. The TG is actually the Nordic thematic groups. It represents the Nordic collaboration in general. We have 3 thematic groups and they're all behind this report. So they have ordered this study from Nordregio, and we're happy to present it here today. We also have several thematic group members in the audience today with us here. So we also hope to hear some of your thoughts on the findings. As it's also called an arena, we were hoping to create a dialogue event together with all the members here in the audience. But as it turns out, it was a very popular event. So we still hope to gain some dialogue and discussion going, but it's slightly trickier with so many of you, but please use the chat function and I try to follow the chat and ask the questions as we move along. Or if you have some other ideas or critique or comment, this is the event where we would be very happy to hear even like examples from your regions, or if you have some critical views on whatever we say here. This is like a learning experience and sharing of results, as well as just sharing new ideas. So we are very open to having all kinds of views. So please use the chat, or we can even come up with other ideas later in the program, how you can be part of this. So just briefly, the agenda today. First, we will be launching the first report out of many. This project has just started. This is the very first report, and then in the upcoming years, there will be several other outputs that we will communicate later. So Linda Randall will be presenting the report. Then we will be hearing a commentary remarks from Paula Mikkola. She is the representative of the cross-border committee, but also a member of one of the Nordic thematic groups. Then we will move on to hearing our experts, external experts, and hear more about the practical implications of remote work, some mobility patterns in Stockholm and also in Finland. So we will have Louisa Vogiazides, a postdoctoral researcher from Stockholm University, and also Kati Pitkänen, a PhD and senior researcher from the Finnish Environment Institute, Syke, to give us some external perspectives. And then we will also be followed by commentary remarks from Nana Bay Sundebay. And she's also representing one of our Nordic thematic groups. So we will have hopefully a lot of good inputs from all these people and get some good dialogue going. But with further ado, I think we'll just give the floor to Linda, and she will introduce the first report and its findings.
Thank you so much. I was so happy. As Pipsa said, we originally wanted this to be a very interactive session, and we planned to host it as a meeting so we could see all your faces and include you, but actually it's not possible to have a meeting with more than 100 people. So we encourage you, if you hear something or you see something that you really want to comment on, please use the chat, but you can also tell us if you would like to have something to say, and we can promote you to a presenter and include you that way. So as Pipsa said, the aim of this arena format is actually an opportunity for us to present our ideas in a more informal way that allows scope for some critique and also some discussion. So this project, Remote Work Effects on Nordic People, Places and Planning, will run until 2024. And we've taken a little bit of a different approach here. Instead of working very hard and putting our heads down for 2-3 years and producing some research and then coming with a very fat report in the end, we actually decided that we want to share our knowledge with you as soon as we have it. So we will release a series of reports. And this particular report is the first in the series. So it's, even though it's a finished report, it's very much still a work in progress. And our aim here is to kind of give a broad overview of the state of play with regards to remote work in the Nordic countries, and sort of set ourselves up for a more in-depth look into the regional and local levels in coming activities. So our focus here is even though we're looking at the regional and the planning perspective, our focus is very much still from the national level. Important to sort of point out that when we're talking about remote, we're probably less interested, I guess, in remote work per se, and more interested in its potential effects on cities and regions. So to give you sort of an idea, the kind of narrative, I guess, that kind of ties these two concepts together is a little bit around the pandemic sort of made remote working more common, and I guess you can say also more comfortable for many of us. And this has the sort of theory is that this will result in changes to commuting patterns, living preferences, and perhaps also greater opportunity to split time between multiple locations. And that it's actually this that has the possibility for longer term effects on regional development and planning. And this is where we're sort of really interested. Having said that, in this report, we still wanted to sort of delve in a little bit to this question around whether or not increased remote work is actually here to stay or not, because although that's not our primary interest area, without the remote work, there will not be any regional effects of remote work. So we dug a little bit into that question. We also looked at what could be the potential regional development and planning effects. And I very much use this word potential here because all that we can really do at this point is observe the spatial trends that we experienced during the pandemic and then think about how those could be continued. But of course, it's quite difficult separating out some of the other pandemic effects from the increased remote work, which was just one of many things that happened to us in the last couple of years. Finally, we look a bit at the policy context in the Nordic countries. So looking a little bit about how are the different governments reacting and how does that relate to regional policy prior to the pandemic. So increased remote work, is it here to stay? The short answer is yes. We spoke to, or we believe so, we spoke to representatives from unions and business associations in all the countries. We also looked at a lot of different surveys that have been conducted. And by all accounts, the expectation was that even once the public health situation goes back to normal, that we will work remotely more than we did before. But importantly, most of these studies found that even though between half and 2/3 of those who are working remotely during the pandemic would like to continue to do so, very few people want to work remotely all of the time. So while maybe, 2/3 might say, I like to work from home 2 to 3 days a week, if you ask people if they want to be completely remote, it's more like 2 or 3% of the respondents in these different surveys carried out mostly by the unions in the different countries. So this kind of suggests a little bit that our ability to make the hybrid situation work will be quite important in predicting whether this trend is maintained. So what will be the impact on innovation within companies, for example, collaboration in the public sector? It's also a pretty important consideration from a planning perspective, because this influences if a person needs to be physically present in their workplace some of the time, this obviously influences a little bit the degree to which they have the geographic flexibility. And the other caveat when we say remote work might be here to stay is that remote work is obviously not for everyone. Most people cannot work remotely. So this was a map actually is in this report and also from our State of the Nordic Region report, looking at the proportion of jobs in each Nordic municipality that can be done from home. So on average, 37% of Nordic jobs can be performed remotely. That's 9.5 million jobs. It's not nothing. But still, we should bear in mind that this is a particular subset of the population that we talk about here. And I think one thing that's kind of interesting to look at on this map is that only the the municipalities shaded in purple are the only ones that fall above this Nordic average of 37.1%. So that sort of suggests there's a very small number of municipalities that are making up this large core of workers who can work remotely. And I should probably point out, this is a kind of just to give you some background to the methodology here, this is a theoretical potential. We don't know how many people work remotely in every municipality, but actually in Sweden, they collected quite good data throughout the pandemic on the regional level about who was working remotely. And those numbers correlate very well with this theoretical potential. So looking at this map, we can sort of vaguely assume that this high potential that remote work could be maybe an urban issue. But interestingly, the nature of this potential makes it quite portable. So that leads us on to the potential regional development and planning effects. And as I said in the beginning, we're all pretty aware that the long-term implications are obviously not super clear, but we try to sort of look at what spatial trends can be identified at this point and what they might suggest. And there were three particular sort of aspects that we thought were interesting to look at. The first is mobility. This is a term that can be understood in a range of different ways, but in this work, we understood it as daily mobility, so commuting basically. Migration, so permanent changes in address. And multi-locality, which again is a slippery term, and I think we're far from understanding it very well, but like perfectly. I think Kati can help us here. But for now, I will just say that it's more about the changes in the way that people split their time between multiple locations. So if I start with changing mobility patterns, here you can see some Google mobility data from Norway, Denmark, Finland, and Sweden. And the green line at the top is the average number of people that were commuting on a daily basis. So it's not including weekends, just taking weekdays and looking at commuting behaviour. And we start down the bottom here we start at the beginning of 2022 with this graph, and you can see those lines sort of starting to make their way back up to the green line, but they're nowhere near getting up to it again. So we can sort of assume, or not assume, we can see from this data here that daily commuting is still at reduced rates in these four countries. And I think a question that kind of arises here, if we look into sort of some of the research from like some of the more established research about travel behaviour, historically, our ability to access more stuff in a shorter amount of time through improvements in technology and transport, historically we haven't used those, that hasn't translated into saving time. That has translated into travelling further distances in less time, or travelling further distances to be able to access more things. So for example, to have a higher quality of living, or to get access to maybe more different types of jobs. So I think the question that arises is, if we travel less often, will we be prepared to travel further? And when we look at some data related to migration, that supports a little bit that thesis. So one of the big questions that has been thrown around, even since the earliest days of the pandemic, is around whether or not this trend towards increased remote work will create new opportunities for rural areas and for small and medium-sized cities. And this is a little bit complicated map, but I think it's a fantastic map. So I hope you bear with me while I try to explain it a little bit. So when we tried to understand what was going on with migration during the past couple of years, so during the pandemic, we looked at internal net migration. So people changing their address within the same country. And we wanted to understand that in the context of what was happening before, so we could see if there was something new going on, or it was just a continuation of the same thing. So the two blue shades and also the green shows municipalities that have experienced in-migration. The darkest blue, that in-migration is intensifying, it's becoming more pronounced. The lighter blue, in-migration is still happening, but at a lesser extent than before. And with the green, we see that in-migration as a new phenomenon. So people were not, it was out-migration before, and now it's in-migration. The opposite with the red and orangey yellow shades. So there we have all the municipalities that experience out-migration. The yellow ones, it turned around. So it was in-migration before, now out-migration. The orange ones, the out-migration slowed down. So the people are still leaving more than coming, but less than before. And then the red, we see this out-migration trend intensifying. I think it's really interesting to note the most obvious thing, I guess, on the map is these big red circles on the capital areas and also the larger cities in Sweden. So we see that in Stockholm, Oslo, in Göteborg and Malmö, and also Copenhagen. So we see these sort of big red circles surrounded by some really dark blue ones. So we see accelerated out-migration from the capital municipalities and accelerated growth in the municipalities surrounding them in the dark blue colours there. Helsinki, I think, is particularly interesting. The thing to note about the others is that given their red circles, this was a trend already before. So people who already live in the country moving out from the central areas, it is not a new trend, but it's an intensified trend. And I guess we should also take into account that that's happened together with reduced international in-migration. So that has an effect. Whereas in Helsinki, the trend was looking a bit different before. So Helsinki was already experiencing out-migration. Helsinki was not experiencing out-migration before. Helsinki was experiencing in-migration and now out-migration. So maybe it's a bit similar thing is going on, but it's a new phenomenon in Helsinki, whereas not in the other cities. The other trend that I just want to draw your attention to a little bit is depopulation slowed or even turned around in many municipalities. So if we put them together, it's like 50% of municipalities either experienced a slowing of the depopulation or a turning around. So we can see that in the north of Sweden, Norway, and a little bit in the north of Finland with some green municipalities there. And a lot of these are quite rural and remote municipalities. You can see a little bit there in Finland. And this looks quite different to if you look at maps from pre-pandemic, where the trend was very much towards out-migration from these rural areas. It's really important to make a couple of caveats here, I guess you can say. So in these types of very small municipalities, very small numbers can influence the trend in a particular direction. And then secondly, we don't necessarily know if this is linked to remote work or not. And we'll hear a bit more about that from Louisa later on. But we should also think about the other types of pandemic effects that could be at play here. So for example, university students temporarily staying home could be a driver. We know that young people leaving to go to university is a driver of out-migration in rural areas. That could be something that's slowing these trends down here. So it's too early to be popping champagne corks, but there is a kind of a suggestion in these numbers that there could be something happening that's different from what we experienced before. I'm going to skip multilocality for now because I think Kathy is going to talk quite a bit about multilocality, and I will jump to the different policy responses in the countries. And here I think, so up to this point, I think most of what I've shared, I haven't talked too much about between country differences because there weren't so many. Like what we understood from the literature review work and the interviews was that the experience in the 5 countries was relatively similar when it came to the experience of remote work and the types of mobility and migration trends that we saw. Well, when it comes to the policy perspective, I think then we saw maybe different starting points in each of the countries, which led to kind of different stories about how different policy actors are responding. And I want to be clear here that when I'm talking about policy responses, I'm talking about regional policy. So the regional policy that's steered from the national level. So So I guess this link between remote work and regional policy. So in Iceland, prior to the pandemic, the Icelandic regional policy stated a goal that 10% of all jobs should be specified without placement by 2024. And this was a regional policy priority already before the pandemic, but it's gained a lot of momentum since. So while at the time that policy was put in place, it was seen to be sort of quite ambitious. Now it's feeling, I would say, much more achievable. I'm not sure if we have some Icelanders in our audience that can shed some light there maybe later on. But yeah, the discussion now, so originally the discussion was about managers needing to actually think about which jobs could be classified as being without placement. Now the discussion has shifted towards the fact that managers, if they would like to have a job based in place, they should have a good justification for why this is the case. And the kind of motivation behind this policy is really about that all people should have the right to these state jobs, regardless of where they live in the country. And I think quite interestingly and quite inspiringly, I think looking forward, this Icelandic policy never imagined people working from their homes, working from their living rooms. So you can see here the Regional Development Institute's created a map of potential workstations for these workers who take the jobs without placement. I think it's quite an interesting model of how the jobs can be distributed. Similarly, in Finland, multi-locality was high on the political agenda pre-pandemic, particularly as a strategy to combat depopulation and ageing in rural areas. And as a result of this, the kind of reaction has also been sort of stronger in Finland. So the opportunity to kind of harness the energy of this increased remote work is more evident in Finnish policy discussions, I would say. Whereas in Norway and Sweden, you see within the regional policy, like there's a strong foundation, I guess you can say, like the principles around, so for example, the Icelandic policy or the Finnish, they exist there as well in the Norwegian and the Swedish and the Danish policy, but regional policy frame, but the explicit links are not as clear, I think. So the future direction and the role that this type of distributed work might play in regional policy going forward is less clear, I would say, in these countries than it is in Finland and Iceland. And again, I'm hoping that we have some people in our audience that might give either some further insight into that or a contrary view. So I think that's about enough from me for now. Just to sort of, I guess, come back to those original questions. Increased remote work looks like it is here to stay, but it's not for everybody and it's not all the time. We definitely noticed some changes in migration, mobility and multi-locality during the pandemic, but it's still pretty unclear, I would say, to what extent these are pandemic effects and to what extent they're a beginning of long-term trends. And I think the policy responses are really key here. So, you know, it's not set in, so the pandemic was very much something that was outside of our control and we've just rolled with it. But what happens next? Perhaps we have an opportunity to influence people's behaviour by responding in different ways. And I think the countries, the different approaches and the different things that are going on in the countries is where we can really sort of, I don't know, grab that Nordic added value and share ideas. And that's part of the reason that we took this approach here, that we want to share information as soon as we have it so that we can discuss and we can, learn from each other. Thank you. I'm not going to go anywhere, but I will stop sharing these slides.
Maybe we can just take a quick follow-up question that we have here in the chat. They're just wondering where the data on commuting is from, and this data that you used was from 2020 to 2021, so there isn't any data from 2022 yet available.
The migration or the
I think it was for the mobility, for the commuting.
Yeah, so the commuting is from Google mobility data, so it's not official statistics from it's I guess probably not capturing everybody, but what the graph that I showed was from the beginning of 2022 until April, about the 15th of April, I think, 2022. So that was the first part of 2022 in that data. And then regarding the migration data, it's 2020 and 2021 because there isn't any 2022 data on migration yet. And actually the Finnish data on migration was released only a couple of days ago. So the Finnish, Finland there, it's 2020 data, but we will update that with 2021 data as well for the next publication.
There's also another question in the chat. Does the multi-locality revolve around greater use of summer homes? And Joanna Story also wonders how feasible would it be for those without access to summer homes?
I think that's a really good question. So in the Nordics, the multi-locality is notoriously difficult to track because we know where people live, we know where they work, and we can, through Google and these kind of sources, we can start to understand the way that they move around. But knowing where people spend their time is much more difficult. So we can see, like, for example, the sale of second homes. The number of second homes sold increased quite dramatically, particularly in 2020 in all the countries. But again, like, we're not sure if that is another different type of pandemic effect, or if that is related to increased remote work. We can find articles, particularly, I know a couple from Denmark, around actually buying a second home in 2020 and then regretting it in 2021 once it became a bit more possible to travel internationally again. So I think that's a bit tricky. And yeah, and then again, it comes back to this notion of not for everyone, because the proportion of people who have remote workable jobs, we looked at the incomes of those people, and they're much higher than the incomes of people with non-remote workable jobs. And I'm not sure, but I believe you could say the same for people who have access to second homes. So to be a bit careful about equity issues here and what that actually means.
There's also a good point from Iceland that it's important to distinguish the difference between remote work and the work without specific location, which is a very Icelandic topic, but maybe we'll touch upon that in a short while. But maybe now we could hear some commentary remarks from Paula Mikkola, our representative from one of the Nordic thematic groups, also representing the cross-border committees. We would like to hear your thoughts on the findings of this report, and especially from your perspective, being in the northern parts of Finland and representing the cross-border regions. Hey, Paula.
Hi, thank you. Thank you for the opportunity to comment on the report, which I found very interesting. It was good, and it somehow it in many ways confirms the research that has been done in Finland as well by different organizations. It is, we have also found out that there is a risk of social inequalities that can appear due to this multi-locality. I can understand the municipalities' interest in attracting quite affluent people to come and settle in their areas. But it may lead to what happens with the people who do not have that opportunity. That is a social question, actually. It hasn't been discussed in Lapland so much yet. As you saw, I'm placed in Rovaniemi, which is in the middle of Lapland in Finland. And I work with the cross-border cooperation daily between Sweden, Norway, and Finland. North Kalot area, as it is called, is very sparsely populated. We don't have any big major cities on the borders. We have smaller cities in some of the borders, but not so many big cities that would have the same attraction force as metropolitan areas have. The phenomena that Linda has or the report points out is that the movement and migration and the interest during the pandemic and even after the pandemic is mainly for settlers to move to the closest located municipalities around the metropolitan area and or a larger city, whereas really genuinely remote areas do not attract so many people due to the fact that you have to take extra effort to reach public services. You don't have public transport and available and so on. There are challenges in daily life that do not that people do not find very attractive. On the other hand, we have some resort areas which are very popular, seasonal resort areas which are very popular, which have during the high season periods increase their number of inhabitants by they double or even triple the amount of people residing in the areas. And some of these municipalities have taken action to increase the time of stay, the duration of stay that people spend in their holiday homes by providing services or developing services that may be attractive to these people. So there are two. There are those as well, but they are so recent projects that we don't really see the results yet. When it comes to cross-border issues in this case, well, during the pandemic there wasn't any movement across the borders. That's not as a settler or movement or anyway, people hardly could go to their work in the other country. But when considering remote work and those people who can work remotely and the cross-border perspective, then you have to, there are some legislation that sets limits to how much you can work from abroad and without meeting any serious consequences to your social insurance, for example. Because there is at the moment a rule that it is okay to work up to 25% in abroad. But if you work more than 25%, it means that the employer has to pay social insurance fees or different types of social insurance fees to the country where you reside. And normally they are paid by the employer in the country where the working place is. But if you work remotely, then you come to this situation where if you work more than 25%, the insurances have to be paid to the country where you are actually situated, which means that the employers may not be so willing to employ a remote working person who actually does the work from another country. There are these kind of issues, and it includes a lot of bureaucracy if you choose to work remotely from another country. But as long as you are aware of these challenges or challenges, I would call them, you can overcome them, but it takes a bigger effort. There are, I recently read an article in a Finnish newspaper about, that was reporting about a survey that has been done in Finland about the multilocality, and they said that it's only 1/5, or one person in 5 is genuinely interested in moving, changing their living environment totally. It may be that people are, that is also one reason why you choose, if you are considering a new place to live, you move to some place which is quite near to where you originally lived, so that they don't really move very far away. I had an opportunity to listen to a Swedish municipality which had done research on what are important issues that the youngsters take into consideration when they consider moving to a new place. And what was important for them was the social networks that they had. They play a very important role in the choice of living environment. So people are quite looking for proximity and don't want to move very far away. There is, I think that the different approaches and different political solutions that have been taken in this issue are very important, or are very interesting at least, and I'm looking forward to learning more about, for example, the Icelandic model, and how that could be, if that could be feasible for Finland, because in Finland we have tried to outlocate the state jobs many times, and not succeeded in it very well. So in a sense, there's been a big opposition to moving, placing, for example, state central offices outside the metropolitan areas. So in a sense, we have here quite a few, not only the physical challenges with the land use planning and so on, but also the mental issues that have a high effect on the movement. I don't have so much other things to say.
But that was great.
Yeah, I think we can just quickly comment on some of those aspects, especially the international remote work. We know that also the tax agencies still treat every case as an individual case, so that there isn't really a system in place yet. And earlier today, the Nordic cooperation ministers held a meeting, and they were actually discussing also the findings of this report. And they were also paying a lot of attention to this taxation system, and that something needs to be done there to improve the collaboration. Would you have any comments on Paula's remarks?
Yeah, I mean, maybe just briefly to say, I think for me, a really interesting aspect when we've studied for a long time, and at Nordregio have had a big interest in cross-border regions and cross-border labour markets. And I think for me, what's really fascinating with this issue is that all of a sudden any region becomes a cross-border region. So for example, someone living in Oslo who wants to work in Helsinki, for example. So, and I think perhaps many of us are not so aware of the types of barriers that might exist and how they might be overcome. So I think here we have a lot to learn from our colleagues in the cross-border regions. And I think, yeah, we should make sure that we draw on that knowledge as we go forward. Thanks a lot, Paula.
Yes, and that also related to the comment that our Icelandic participant added about the jobs without location that's been happening in Iceland for some years now. So the national or the government posts jobs without location, and then they have these distant offices so that anybody can apply for these jobs and you don't have to be located in a specific location to be able to do the job. So we probably have also a lot to learn from there. But yes, now we have to move on in the program. Next, we would like to hear some more of these practical implications of remote work. And we will see a presentation from Louisa Vogiazides from Stockholm University. Hello, Louisa.
Hello, good afternoon. Let me share my presentation.
Great.
There. Okay. Yes, I will talk to you about a recent study I did together with my colleague Jutta Kavalerovic, who is also here today, about urban exodus in times of COVID-19. So since the beginning of the pandemic, the media have abounded with stories of people leaving large cities and finding refuge in the countryside. And here are some headlines from the US, the UK, France, Canada, and Australia. But also in Sweden, you might have seen articles with pictures of individuals or families that have left Stockholm to live their dream life in the countryside. For instance, like this family on the right picture that realized that they didn't really need Stockholm after all. So we wanted to study this phenomenon and in particular, try to answer two research questions. The first one is, to what extent did individuals leave the Stockholm inner city in 2020 during the pandemic? Where did they relocate to? And what are the characteristics of these movers? And our second question is, to what extent and how do the patterns and determinants of outmigration from the Stockholm inner city differ in the COVID and pre-COVID periods? So, but first, some considerations about urban exodus in times of pandemic. So we know that during the COVID-19 pandemic, some people have left large cities around the world to resettle in smaller communities as a strategy of self-isolation or to avoid contagion. And in addition, the restrictions and urges for social distancing have also decreased the attractiveness of large cities, and especially the closure of or the restrictions towards the entertainment and cultural industries, which are the city's biggest assets. But perhaps the city attractiveness maybe has decreased less in Stockholm than in other cities where in countries where more proper lockdowns were implemented. Because as you know, the restrictions were comparatively milder in Sweden. And then, of course, the topic for today's seminar is remote work. And remote work has had a number of implications. First, people developed a desire to have larger dwellings that includes office space, and also spending a lot of working time and leisure time at home also made people to have a preference for gardens, for having a garden, or being in proximity to a green area. And finally, the expectation that hybrid work will continue even after the pandemic might have led people to be willing to move further away from the city center but close enough to be able to commute twice or 3 times a week, but perhaps too far for a daily commuting. So now I'm gonna tell you very briefly about the data and methods for our study. We used Swedish registered data for the period 2015 to 2020. So 2020 then represents the year during the pandemic. And we had information about the municipality of residence and dwelling ID number. Of course, I need to make a disclaimer and stress that Swedish registered data, we only have information on recorded changes of address, which means that if a person relocated in their second home without registering their address there, we would miss that. So we expect that urban exodus is a bit underestimated in our study. We miss all these informal relocations that are temporary or perhaps even long-term, permanent. We have performed descriptive analysis and regression analysis. And so the focus really is on mobility away from the Stockholm inner city, which corresponds to the Stockholm municipality. So when I talk about the inner city, then I mean the Stockholm municipality. Okay, now some results. And here on this figure, we see the internal migration trends from the Stockholm inner city for the 2 periods. And as we saw from Linda's presentation, already before the pandemic, the Stockholm inner city was already experiencing an internal migration deficit. That means that more individuals moved out of the municipality to the rest of Sweden than people from the rest of Sweden who moved into the Stockholm municipality. But still, this internal migration deficit became more pronounced in 2020, as you can see here. And although we didn't use data from 2021 in the rest of the study, we still had got to check how the situation is for 2021, thanks to the data released by Statistics Sweden a couple of months ago. And we can see that these trends of 2020 were maintained in 2021, and even the net internal migration deficit was even further accentuated in 2021. And now let's have a look at the destinations of the residents who moved from the Stockholm inner city. And here on the graph, we see those destinations in terms of proportions of all the moves. And we can see that the moves from the Stockholm inner city to the Stockholm suburbs have increased in proportion in 2020, while the moves within the Stockholm inner city here, they decreased. Where's my mouse? There. And in fact, even the proportions of moves to the other 3 types of destinations increased, but it's not so visible on this figure, but perhaps a bit more visible here on this one, which really focuses on the differences in flows between the 2 periods. And we can see that the largest increase was for the Stockholm suburbs, and followed by for small city or rural areas. And in the 3rd place, there was an increase for the other metropolitan regions of Sweden, which is basically Gothenburg and Malmö. But still, we need to to acknowledge that we're talking about rather small increases. For the Stockholm suburbs, it is only a 1.4 percentage point increase. So the numbers are still small. Now looking at a couple of maps to see more specific municipalities of destination. Here we see, so the municipalities are sorted in deciles by the proportion of movers from the Stockholm inner city who relocated there in 2020. And so the municipalities in dark green are the ones receiving the most residents from Stockholm inner city. So clearly we see that the suburbs are the largest recipients of residents from the inner city. But we can also distinguish some other municipalities, the other two metropolitan municipalities, Malmö and Gothenburg, but also some medium-sized cities like Linköping, Lund, Västerås, Umeå. And then we also see that some touristic destinations are standing out, like the island of Gotland or the municipality of Åre, which has a ski resort. And on this map, we can look at the differences of inflows between the two periods. And we can see that the municipalities in yellow are the ones that experienced the biggest increase in the proportion of in-movers from the Stockholm inner city. And there again, we see a number of municipalities that are suburban in the suburbs of Stockholm, like Södertälje, Nacka, Österåker, Järfälla, but also some medium-sized cities such as Lund, Nyköping, Linköping, and also Gotland had a large increase of in-movers in 2020. And now I'm going to talk about the characteristics of the out-movers from the Stockholm inner city. And a first interesting finding is that we didn't find any big differences in the characteristics of out-movers before and during the pandemic. So where differences exist, they are small in magnitude and they didn't change the direction of the association, with one exception, which is self-employment, and I will come back to that. So the movers are largely the same as they were before the pandemic. Okay, so here are the results of a multinomial logistic regression model for 2020. And I will focus on the variables that are work-related, which I think are the most interesting ones for this seminar. And so first of all, self-employment. And we can see that in 2020, here, self-employed individuals had a higher relative risk of moving out of the Stockholm region. And what's interesting, and especially the effect was the highest for moving to a small city or rural area. And what's interesting is that the situation was different before the pandemic, when the self-employed were less likely to move to the suburbs or to a medium-sized city. And the estimates for the other two destinations were not statistically significant. So, and whereas in 2020, all destinations that are outside the Stockholm region are positive and statistically significant. So it seems like the pandemic provided an incentive to self-employed for leaving the Stockholm region. Maybe we're thinking maybe that could be in relation to job loss. We're not so sure, but we want to dig deeper and try to understand that trend, which has differed from the situation before the pandemic. Otherwise, of course, we looked at which occupations were the most likely to leave the Stockholm inner city and by destination. And there we can see that healthcare workers are more likely to move to medium-sized cities and to small cities or rural areas. And other public service workers, which includes education and the police, were also more likely to move to a small city or a rural area.
Sorry,
however, yes.
Just quickly, you have 1 to 2 minutes time to wrap up since we are running a bit late on schedule. So I hope that you can
then
find a good way to. Sorry to interrupt.
Yes, no problem. So that's so basically, on the other hand, we did not find that knowledge workers, so including IT, the IT sector and engineering, that they would have a higher risk of moving to smaller municipalities. And we also looked at this other variable using a classification of remote work, where we saw that individuals that are with higher quintiles of teleworking, with occupations that are more suited to teleworking, were actually less likely to move to small cities or rural areas or to medium-sized cities. So I will just skip this one and go directly to my conclusions, which is that it seems that from our study that the pandemic accentuated suburbanizing and counter-urban moves from the Stockholm inner city in 2020, and especially the suburbs are the big winners. But we cannot speak about a massive urban exodus, because the numbers are actually still rather small. But if these trends are to be sustained, of course, that would have implications for the receiving municipalities in terms of infrastructure and services, and also housing prices. And then finally, as I said, the movers to the small cities or rural areas are likely to be self-employed or work within healthcare or other public services. And these are actually occupations that are in demand across the whole country, but they are not really occupations that are associated with remote work. And instead, the occupations that are associated with remote work do not seem to be undergoing this counter-urban migration. Unless, as I wrote in this point, that we were thinking that perhaps people that can work remotely in knowledge workers, for instance, they might relocate to their second home outside the city, but keep their address in the city, their official address, where also their office is based. So perhaps we are missing out some moves due to a lack of registration among certain types of occupations. But overall, I think the conclusion of the study is that teleworking seems to largely remain an urban phenomenon. Thank you.
Thanks a lot, Louisa. I think that gives us like some nice insight into, I guess exercising some caution and not jumping to conclusions. But as I guess someone mentioned in the chat while you were speaking, Joanna, I think it is, yes. That actually when we do this kind of statistical analysis, we look at quite big numbers overall, but for some rural communities, a really small number of in-migrants can make a huge difference actually. And so I think, and that's something I guess we don't understand from the statistical work, and we can zoom into the local level. But thanks a lot, Louise. I think that gives some good context. And I want to invite our thematic group member, Nana.
So first we'll have a presentation from Kati Pitkänen from the Finnish Environment Institute. And I hope, Kati, you can try and speed things up a little bit. We're running a little bit behind schedule, so we can still have a discussion after your presentation.
Okay, thank you. I will try to be quick. I'm not sure if it's possible because this is my favorite topic.
No worries.
So sorry for that. But thank you so much, Linda and Pipsa, for inviting me to this very interesting seminar. I have truly enjoyed the previous presentation, so I hope that my presentation can give something added to that what we already heard of. So I will talk about, I will move from remote work and migration into multilocality, and I will tell you some of our work in Finland related to that. And I have also some, in the end of my presentation, I have some slides about remote work in Finland as well. But first, a couple of words about multilocality research at the Finnish environment. And we have a team of researchers working at Syke who have over 15 years of experience of working with multilocality, and especially second homes, the summer homes that we already heard being mentioned in the couple of previous presentations. Here on the slide, you can see some examples of our previous work focused on that. But during the past couple of years, we have focused more on the concept of multilocality and multilocal living. And we have sort of tried to conceptualize and contextualize what multilocality means in the Finnish and also Nordic context. We've looked into, for example, rural-urban interactions related to multilocality, data considerations, and also touched upon the environmental and social sustainability of multilocality. We have a couple of projects ongoing and just finished projects on multilocality, and I will use the results of those projects in my presentation today. The concept of multilocality, if we want to define it very briefly, it is kind of a social practice where people share their lives in between of multiple locations of work, leisure, as well as social and material relations. I have to point here that multilocality is not always people's own choice, but we have groups of people who are forced to be multilocal, such as, for example, children in custody or refugees or homeless people. And we should not really think of multilocality as only one or pinpoint it into one particular phenomenon, such as second homes, but we should more see it as a kind of a continuum of different kinds.
Kati, I think we lost you for a bit. Is your connection okay? Kati, can you hear us? I think we might have lost.
Can you hear me now?
Yes, now you're back. Can you go back to your presentation? We lost the presentation.
Yes. Sorry, where did you lose me? Did you hear anything?
Yeah, yes. You were explaining this slide. I can't remember the exact sentence you were on. But just continue somewhere there.
Okay, I was explaining about this graph on the slide. Yes. That kind of this is the multitude of multilocality in a sense that I'm trying to illustrate with this graph here. And I will point out here that remote work and multilocality, they are very much related to each other, but they are not synonymous to each other. And I will come back to this later on. And in our research at Syke, we have tried to sort of illustrate how multilocal and mobile people nowadays are, which means that the permanent residence is a very poor proxy for modern life. And our societies should do better in taking account these multilocal realities of people. Let's go back to the slides. And especially from the point of view of regions, this is a very important notion, because population registers, statistics, and population policies, they tend to link people to their permanent residence and kind of assume that people's lives revolve around this one place of residence that is they kind of in the official records, their official residence. But in reality, this is of course not true. But for example, if you look at the real population, it varies both daily and seasonally in regions, municipalities, villages, and on the very local level, villages and neighborhoods. And here on the slide, you can see a map where we've used mobile phone data to sort of track where people really are located at different times of the year. And the map compares January and July 2020, comparing kind of the population in those 2 months. And as you can see from the map, there is a really big difference between different months of the year. For mobile phone data like this, it's very cool and a neat way to sort of illustrate the variation of the seasonal population, and also kind of it allows the analysis of local population flows. But mobile phone data is not enough to track and monitor multilocality, because it does not really tell us who these people are who are moving in between of regions, who are sometimes absent from certain places and sometimes present in certain places. And to sort of go more deeper into the issue of multilocality, we have tried to identify different types of multilocality in the Finnish society. And we used grouping based on mobility and multilocality motives. And we have identified different types of multilocal groups related to leisure related reasons, work and education related reasons, social reasons, and also other reasons. I won't go into details into these groups. That would be a topic for another presentation, but I will point out some interesting groups on the slides. First of all, the second homes. It has been estimated that up to half of Finnish people regularly visit second homes annually, which is a very kind of high share and high number of people. But there are also some other interesting groups, for example, social reasons, children time sharing between parents, or couples living apart from each other. Also work-related reasons for multilocality, such as work-related second home, seasonal workers, etc. And when we talk about, when we are interested in the regional point of view, I think it's important to notice that not only the number of people belonging to this group is interesting, but even more interesting is how this affects the time spent in different regions, which is why we have looked also on the time spent, the number of nights related to different types of multilocality in the Finnish society. And we have also tried to model this, or we have modeled this. And here I have to give the gratitude to my colleague Antti Rehunen, who is behind these modelings and also these maps that you can see here on the slide. And we have tried to sort of model the time spent and what is the effect of multilocality to the population redistribution in Finland. And in the modeling, we have divided people's annual time spent between different places of multilocality. For example, in concerning the second homes, we've looked at the permanent homes and the second home locations. And we've done this modeling for two types of multilocality, this leisure-related second homes and also work-related second homes. And this resulting multilocal population is here then on these maps compared to this official registered population in different municipalities, so that it illustrates what is the difference to the official view if we consider multilocality. And according to the results, time spent at leisure-related second homes, it shifts approximately 175,000 person years between municipalities. The winners are the rural municipalities, who grow in population by 7%, and the losers are urban municipalities, who lose approximately 3% of their population. Sorry, I think my connection broke again. Sorry, can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you. Yes, we can hear you.
Yes. So did it break again for a long time, or?
No, just like
Okay.
1 second.
I'm sorry, I think the connection is probably quite bad on my side.
I think earlier was actually our side, so please continue.
Well, a good wake-up call for everybody to sort of go back up here. Yes, okay. So then work-related second homes also shifts population between municipalities, and the effect here is approximately 23,000 people person years. And the winners and losers are not so clear-cut as in relation to the lesser related second homes, but obviously urban areas are the winners because lots of jobs are concentrated in them, but also some more rural municipalities where in Lapland, for instance, where there are lots of tourism and mining industry. So that was about the more broader concept of multilocality, and I have then a couple of slides on remote work to finish my presentation with. And as I said in the beginning, remote work is very much related to multilocality, but those two are not the same thing. But remote work can be seen more kind of a factor that can both decrease and increase multilocality. It can decrease multilocality because it sort of decreases the need for commuting and work-related second homes. So if you can work from home, you don't necessarily have to rent a flat in the place where you work at, for instance. But it can also increase multilocality because it gives people more flexibility in choosing where they want to work at. And they can choose these locations based on, for example, lesser related reasons or family reasons. And in here also remote working comes very close to the ideas of digital nomads, co-working spaces, and working at second homes that we already covered to some extent in today's webinar. I have compiled here on the slide some facts about remote working in Finland. Here on the right, you can see a graph based on Statistics Finland's survey on the share of employees working regularly from home. So they track regularly the amount of people who work at home. This is not the same thing as remote work entirely, but it sort of gives the picture of how popular remote working is in different regions. And you can see the different Finnish regions here on the graph. I'm sorry, it's in Finnish, but I didn't have time to translate it. But what you can notice here is, of course, what we've been talking about today is that remote work peaked during the COVID-19, and especially 2020. And since then, 2021, still the share of remote workers in different regions is pretty high. There are some changes in some regions. People seem to have returned to their workplaces, and in some regions, the share of remote workers is still growing. And what is also interesting are these regional differences, which are related to, for example, the structure of industries of different regions. As you can see, the Uusimaa is leading here because there are lots of jobs related to administration, information and communication and science, which can be easily done remotely. It's been estimated that regular remote working is possible for approximately 30 to 40% of the employed in Finland. And what is also interesting and already mentioned today is that some surveys in Finland point out that from those people who do regular remote work, 20% say that they also work at second homes. So those two are also very much related to each other. And we also done some modeling related to remote work and how it sort of affects the population redistribution in Finland. And the effect on related to remote work is especially on this daily multilocality, sort of movements within the day and daily population distribution. According to the modeling, remote work shifts at most 2 to 4% of person years between municipalities. And the winners in this case are, of course, those places where people live in, for example, the commuter belt around big cities, the smaller towns and rural areas close to cities such as Helsinki, Tampere or Turku. And remote work then decreases the daily population in those places where these jobs and offices are located in, that is the cities and city centers. Okay, this was everything from me. I'm sorry for the bad connection. And thank you.
Thank you, Kati. Like I said, the first problem was actually probably at our end here in Stockholm. So we actually got a funny comment about Latvia. They seem to have an amazing broadband even in rural areas, and we're here struggling in the capital city regions. Kati, I would love to talk more about this, and especially I noticed that the Finnish Environment Institute published a report about how the emissions have actually come down in the Finnish municipalities during 2020. And this would be a super interesting topic to also discuss the sustainability aspect to the remote work, and we had planned to do so today, but it seems like we are a little bit lagging behind schedule. So let's see if we get to that point. But first, we would like to hear a commentary remark from one of our Nordic thematic group member, Nanna Bay Sönderberg. Are you here, Nanna? Yes. Hey.
Unmute myself here. Thank you so much. And can you hear me now?
Yes, we can. And you are based in Denmark, and we would love to hear some reflections. Now we have heard a presentation from Stockholm and from Finland, and maybe you could share some of your experience from Denmark.
Yes, thank you. Thank you so much for the invitation to comment on this very relevant, interesting report and presentations. And thank you, Louisa and Kati, for two very interesting studies. Would love to hear more at some point. My point of perspective is as a representative for the Danish Housing and Planning Authority, and I work with physical planning related to the Planning Act. And in Denmark, the municipalities has the planning competency, which is regulated through the Planning Act and the Summer House Act when it comes to summer houses. And I find it very interesting to see the perspective of how these trends and tendencies might affect the physical planning. And I'll say a little about how I see the connections to how we're working with these tendencies in Denmark. And then I'd like to ask two questions, one for Louisa and one for Kati, and then might spark the debate. Maybe some other perspective could be brought in here. But I see that in Denmark, and as the report states, there is no clear link to remote work in the Danish work towards the more, where the agenda is very much on the more balanced development between the urban and rural development. And there has been a lot of discussion about the potential in remote works for the rural areas, but it's yet to be seen how this should be worked more strategically or politically with initiatives. There's an initiative to work more intensively with the infrastructure, and especially the digital infrastructure. But there is a clear agenda in the Danish context about this attractiveness of smaller towns, and there is, of course, related to how to increase the amount of people moving to these smaller town centers. And we also see the initiative in relation to the remote works, where some municipalities have started to work with the potential of establishing work hubs in the town centers. It's more linked to the agenda of attractive city centers and creating more lively town centers in the small and medium-sized towns. But here it's interesting for our point of departure to see how the municipalities can work strategically with this opportunity, which is accelerated by the remote work and distance work. And it's important to say that this is not within the public sector, it's more within the private sector. But still there is a tendency to the pattern of people moving to small and medium towns in close proximity to the larger cities like Copenhagen, Aarhus, and Aalborg, which is very much related to what you said, Louisa. And I would like to hear if you have any have you registered any reactions or tendency within the physical planning or the municipalities, the incoming or the municipalities which receives more people? Do they have any strategic work with this migration, or is there a reaction in the physical planning? You see any changes here?
I would like to redirect the question to the colleagues at Nordregio, because that hasn't been, we worked solely on registered data and looking at trends, and we haven't really looked at the policy response So, but you haven't you had chances to talk to different municipalities?
Right. Yep, can I hear me? Yeah. Sorry, I'm not sure we're on and off with the meeting. We have our colleague Maria helping us with this. Actually, that's what we're going to do next. And so Nanda is actually part of this project and will help us to. So at the next stage of the project, we will make case studies in urban municipalities and rural municipalities to look at exactly what have been kind of the local level planning responses. Yeah, if you're out there in the audience and you feel like you could answer this question, then I encourage you to actually reach out to us, because it could be that your municipality is a really interesting one for us to study in the next phase of the project.
Yeah, and of course I know that this is very early, and so it's more if there is a tendency to see how both the cities who loses inhabitants, but also the receiving communities, if there is any tendency towards. Also, one of the debates in Denmark can be what does this do to the combination of housing opportunities? Is there a lack of, now you mentioned, Louisa, that a lot of, there might be a need for smaller houses with gardens as people leave their apartments and doesn't want to move into a newer apartment. And is there any discussion on this case? And then I was also, in relation to Kati, you mentioned these, it's very interesting. And in Denmark, there's also this Summer House Act regulating the use of summer houses. And there might be some implication in regard to the increased use, for example, of how long you can stay within a year without having your address on these specific second homes and summer houses. And seen from this perspective, it would be interesting to hear in your perspective and with your studies, what are the biggest challenges of this monolocality system that we have with the tax regulations that you were also touching upon, Louisa? What are the biggest challenges in this monolocality, or how can it be more suitable for this multilocality that you're elaborating on in your study?
Well, there's been a kind of
where to start, so to speak.
Where to start? I think our municipalities and the rural areas, for example, if you talk about second home related multilocality, I think our rural municipalities, they could kind of do a lot more with the multilocal people already now without us having to change the legislation first. There has been a lot of debate in Finland about this dual citizenship and sharing of taxes between different municipalities, and they've been it has been surveyed many times already before COVID and anything in Finland, and always always the conclusion is that it would require such big constitutional changes that it might be too difficult to sort of realize. But I think there is a lot that the municipalities can already do, and all the local not even the municipalities, but the local communities, by sort of engaging these people who spend a lot of time, and now during the COVID even more time in these local places, sort of by involving them to local associations and kind of these, you were talking about, for example, these improvements in city centers and all this kind of work that can also be partly volunteer based and third sector, fourth sector type of things.
It's very interesting. And I'm, of course, very interested in how this also might affect the planning practices to take in this multilocality better into account, and how we can see that in the municipal planning practices.
Well, yes, this is definitely also one good question. If, for example, people start to spend a lot of time at second homes, like what kind of, then it comes to for example, in Finland, there's been discussion about whether to sort of be able to provide children schooling in these rural municipalities, and these are issues that need to be sort of sorted out.
Yes, and also if there's a seasonal aspect to this, would this only be relevant in the summertime, or is it also a winter services, or how do you work with that within a planning?
Yeah, so many aspects to this. Public services, because they are so divided by the municipalities, like how do we make them totally independent of location. Yes, I think we have now a link in the chat to follow up what Linda just asked. Maybe you want to briefly explain what it is about?
I can just maybe before we wrap up just say some final words about the next steps in the project and how you can be involved. But first I want to say thanks a lot to our speakers and our commentators, and yeah, it was really great to hear from you, and also to all of you out there in the chat. It was really nice to have that running alongside. So the project, as I said, goes until June 2024, and our next step is to zoom in on the regional level through both a survey, which I have linked to in the chat here. It's there, the link will take you to an English version, but then there are links that you can actually take the survey in whichever Nordic language you prefer. And we'll also, as I say, we want to come and visit you and make some case studies. So if you have ideas or if you think that your region or municipality could be a particularly interesting example, then feel free to reach out, or feel free to reach out just in general if you've been working on something interesting that could be relevant for us. We'll also take a bit more detailed look at some of these statistical aspects, and we'll be coming actually with another publication in September where we will delve in a bit deeper into some of the aspects around, who is moving and how big are these numbers actually when we talk about the changes in trends in the rural areas. So yeah, and of course we'll do some further analysis at the end to kind of bring it all together. But yeah, please, I hope that you've enjoyed today, and please feel welcome. Yeah, we'd love to hear from you in our survey, and we'd also be really happy to hear from you in any other capacity as well. And we'll send you, I know this is probably more Pip's part, I'll give you a hand over to you. We will send you all of this information along with the link to the report later in the week.
Yes, the report will be published in a day or two, so you will get that in a newsmail along with the recording and the presentations from today. There was a lot of information there, so I'm sure that many of you are looking forward to actually browsing them through with a little bit more time. We also had lots of questions for Kati and Louisa, and too bad we ran out of time to actually go through all the discussion through, but I'm sure we will have lots of related events coming up next year, next fall, next winter. So we will keep you in the loop, and I hope that all of you will join us next time when we discuss remote work and the next steps in the project. So this was just the very first policy overview report that was published today, or will be published in a day or two when you get it. So thank you so much for everyone in the audience. Thanks for joining the chat discussion, and thanks to our speakers once again. It was a pleasure.